Beluga Whale Sidemen. I've got a pretty structured outline of everything that we're going to cover with 3-betting and 3-bet pots. So, without further ado, we're going to talk in detail at great length about 3-betting, 3-bet pots, and what this whole thing means. Because this is one of the spots where when I'm coaching a student, I hear one of the most common things a student will say is, I have a really hard time with 3-bet pots, and I can't seem to win money, or I'm not winning as much money as I should. So let's talk about 3-bet pots to start. The first thing that we need to do is we need to understand the context of what 3-bet pots actually mean. That's where we're going to start with that, and then we're going to move from there to understand how player types affect your situations. We're going to deal with then the responses to player to a 3-betting, which is going to be related to what player types we're dealing with. Then we're going to break it down step by step. We 3-bet in position. We 3-bet out of position. We get 3-bet, we're out of position. We get 3-bet, we're in position. Then we're going to talk about squeezing, how sort of a squeeze dynamic works. Then we're going to deal with deeper stack play, and then we're going to talk about a little bit with regards to heads-up play. I'm sure not all of you guys play heads-up, but it's still important to be aware of it because certainly the same themes are going to run between them both. And then after that, obviously, we'll take question and answer. But in the meantime, by the way, feel free to ask questions during it because if it's a related question during something I'm talking about, I'm happy to address it in the short term. And we'll address some of the more theoretical questions as we go a little bit farther down the line. Okay, cool. Okay, so first we're going to think about is context. To start off, it's like this. I always say this, but a 3-bet pot is a lot like a short stacked game in that the stack to pot ratio is much smaller. This has got some really, really significant effects. The first of which is that your skill and your position mean a lot less in a 3-bet pot. I.e., if we're much better than somebody, we may get some advantages out of 3-betting like we'll talk about later, but one of them is not going to be our ability to like play post-flop really well per se, because that sort of is reduced when we have less money behind. By the same token, when we're in position, it sort of helps to have more money behind as well. And we're going to talk about this stuff more in depth, but it's important to shape the sort of the dynamic of the context before we get into it. But okay, so if there's more money in the pot and less money in stacks, that means sort of intuitively that we're going to have less fold equity in general because essentially people are getting better odds. This is something that people get backwards a lot. People say, oh, well, I 3-bet pre-flop. That should mean I have more fold equity because I'm showing so much strength and showing so much aggression. Not exactly the case. People generally tend to make these decisions based off of the type of cards they're getting, the board, and the type of odds they're getting. And we definitely have less fold equity for a lot of reasons in a 3-bet pot than we do otherwise. Since we have less fold equity, we're getting the showdown a whole hell of a lot more. I.e., if nobody's folding, we're going to see showdown, which is bringing us to like the sort of conclusion that you've heard me say many times before, most likely, is that equity really matters. We're going to talk about equity in something that I call the equity distribution spectrum a little bit later on in the seminar. But we're basically going to find out that our ability to win at showdown is super important and much more important when we get to showdown a lot more. And then the last sort of main thing that we're going to discuss today is the development of image and how 3-betting relates to the development of pre-flop image, which it certainly does. In fact, it's like the basis of our developing image. And then also we'll talk about some common mistakes and some things that I see rather quickly. Cool. And move on. Okay, so the first thing that we need to be able to do is to identify player types quickly, easily, without over-reliance on stats, and essentially being able to understand what our plan is against each of these types of people. There are only 3 types of players. Now, obviously, there's a spectrum within each of these. The most common type of